Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining in. Today, we have with us somebody who is known as the godfather of intellectual property rights in India. He has quite the childlike enthusiasm about him when he talks about either intellectual property or chemistry or anything that actually satiates his curiosity and deep desire to learn. He's an innovative lawyer, an avid reader, and a mentor to many. None other than Mr. Pravin Anand, managing partner Anand. Good evening, sir. Welcome on the show.
Good evening.
Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Vikas, I'm going to hand the baton over to you and go off
Great.
for a while and come back for uh, the second half of the interview then.
Super. Thanks, Tanisha. Hi, Praveen. How are you?
Good.
Good. Well, I think it's better to be known as the godfather of IP than the godfather as we know him.
I hate that expression, Godfather. I mean, I'm like a Don. And these days I've been seeing a lot of those Narcos type films on Netflix. So don't call me that. Somebody
Well,
in a magazine.
Someone's already put a comment up saying Rahul Shatru said it's Don Anand.
Tell him in that case he's been my junior, so he's one of those mafiasos. That makes him a mob guy.
Anyway, welcome to Unsuited. Really happy to have you on board and one of our special guests for this program. So we're going to start off with the whole journey to getting into IP, because you said we've talked before about how your early years were very fundamental in developing your passion for intellectual property and curiosity, and experimentation. So tell us a bit about your life as a child, and including, you were sent off to hostel very young, and how did those kind of experiences shape your life, and your kind of whole drive for curiosity and understanding intellectual property?
Yeah, I think my grandfather played a great role in shaping some of my early thinking and perhaps in putting in me a desire for learning intellectual property and appreciating creative talent. He was both an inventor who'd make funny cosmetic creams and put them in the fridge, and the whole place would stink, and my grandmother and he would fight over that. And he was also an artist at the same time, and he'd make these disproportionate paintings of horses, which my father and my uncle, after their drinks, would have a look at and chuckle. And but he was very talented. Not only was he talented, he applied for patents. He opened offices. His was, I think, one of the first Indians to get into intellectual property in 1923, and opened offices in 5 cities. And those offices continued even after they acquired their own independent status. They continued, and the people who were running those offices became well-known law firms in the field. And so my grandfather, I was the only child in the family, and so he really spoiled me. There is a story about how he would make me sit on his lap, and he would ask me to, kind of use expletives for people, and he'd enjoy that and give me sips of his whiskey, and my parents would hate that. And I think the tipping point came one particular day when he asked me to throw up an egg, which was not properly, the yolk had broken, and I threw it, and apparently it was broken from the ceiling. And my parents said, "That's it. Now this boy will get into the hostel." And as a kid, I had all sorts of complexes. I used to suck my thumb, and I had absolute stage fright. And I went to the hostel, and there things changed. They completely changed. I remember when I was in the hostel, somebody called me a thumbsucker, and I hate him. And both he and me, we broke each other's glasses, and we both got what St. Xavier School would give grey cards. 3 grey cards, and you were out of the school. And so it was a traumatic thing for me. But one thing it did, from coming second from the bottom of the class, I suddenly started to turn serious. And then I started doing quite well from class 5 onwards. And when I left the hostel and came home, my grandfather permitted me to have a chemistry lab at home. And it was a fairly rudimentary one at that stage, at that level. But we had a milkman who worked in a lab in Lajpat Nagar. And he would come giving me chemicals. And the result was I started to collect a lot of salts, which I would be able to look at and analyze without analysis, be able to tell this is barium sulfate, this is potassium nitrate, this is sodium carbonate, and so on. And that was good because that was my early interest in chemistry. And then eventually when I went into class 9, I did chemistry and then chemistry honors in St. Stephen's College. So that's how my interest went from my grandfather, traveled all the way into a love for sciences. I would say beyond chemistry, sciences. Yeah.
That's interesting. I mean, I'm going to, again, refer back to The Godfather and that early kind of stage where if your grandfather's painting horses, maybe that was the early kind of setup for you becoming Godfather.
Not buying them, not buying and selling.
or cutting their heads. Like what's a famous scene from Godfather?
Never.
Yeah.
Never.
And
never
then,
any harm to an animal. That's something that I've really kind of, it's a fundamental. No harm to any animal. Yeah.
What got you on, because that early journey you're talking about, this passion for chemistry and experimenting, how did that translate into getting into law and IP law in particular then? That's quite a switch from becoming a chemist engineer to switching careers altogether.
I think it was my blackmailing father who suddenly came and sat when I was in St. Stephen's College. I got a scholarship to go to the US, to Duke's University, which is a very good university in chemistry. And everything was decided till he came and sat and made a long face and he was sad. And I asked him what it was. And he said, oh, what will happen to the law firm? And he pointed to a set of AIRs, because that's all we had at that time. What will happen to this great library? I mean, AIR is probably the smallest portion of our library today. But I'm just saying, and I came into that blackmail and I said, all right. And I gave up my chemistry career, so to say, and turned to law. That's how it happened. But one thing that chemistry did for me was, or this lesson was, that if you give, you get back a lot. Because what happened later in life was I became a patent lawyer. And today I have chemistry cases every day of my life. So I got back my chemistry. So in a sense, I've seen it happen with others as well. I think it's a great learning. You give and you get back double.
Yeah. And you've been able to marry the two subjects and keep your passion alive.
Yes. In fact, one of the theories we have in our firm is to have hybrids. And a hybrid is a person who's law plus science or law plus economics, or, to get into things like valuation and things. So it's got to be a combination of at least two subjects. That's called a hybrid. And so we try to develop more and more hybrids. So if somebody is coming from an engineering side, we try to get them to do law. And if that's how we kind of promote a synergy between the lawyers and the engineers in the firm.
Very good. And then obviously you've developed a great kind of name brand in the IP field. And You've used judgments from foreign courts exposing Indian judges to a new line of thought with regards to IP law. Your accounts win several landmark IP cases, including those involving the first Anton Pillar order, the first Mareva injunction order, India's first SEP litigation, pre-suit mediation litigation involving Nokia, moral rights of artists, which was Amarnath Sehgal. And you've received the National Innovation Foundation Award from the Indian government in recognition of pro bono work for rural innovators at grassroots levels. You've really greatly contributed to IP law in this country and essentially helped shape its evolution in India. We've already discussed about how you moved from engineering to specializing in IP law, but how do you feel the law has evolved over the time that you've been practicing as an IP lawyer in India?
Well, there was a time when the law was just trademark law. You would hardly ever hear of anything beyond trademarks, perhaps a little copyright law. And today, almost every conceivable subject in law can be linked to intellectual property. You have people talking about intellectual property and human rights, and intellectual property and finance and economics, and intellectual property. Almost it kind of mixes in every merger and amalgamation and every kind of business transaction. There's always an IP component. And why? Because each one of us is a creator. It's a different thing that some of us kind of create for the benefit of not only ourselves, but also for the enjoyment and use by others. And those creators are a small class. In India, there'd be just about 100,000 artists and inventors who have applied for patents, or lyric writers, song producers, or film producers, or journalists. Put them all together, 100,000 for a population of 1.3 billion. If you take out the below 10, that's still 750 million. If you take out 1 to 10 years, because they wouldn't qualify in that league, but teenage upwards. And so you've got one person in 7,500 who create, and the rest of the 7,499 enjoy. So you obviously need people who will, more and more champions, who will try and help the creators as much as they can.
And is that statistic of 100,000, is that as of today? Like, we have 100,000 artists, creators with patents to their name in India today?
So this is the kind of calculation which I've done by taking all the associations and adding them on the assumption that the others, there's an artist in every home, there's a singer in every bathroom, but I'm not adding those people. I'm adding those that have made it their profession and are therefore doing it beyond their own families and personal being for the enjoyment of the others. So that's about 100,000. That's it.
Wow.
A country as large as ours.
And how does that, where does India rank in that kind of global statistic then? Because that doesn't seem like a very high number at all.
No, it doesn't. Except that the diversity in India is huge. So you have people who make saris. You have a look at those saris, and they are no less than a Leonardo da Vinci painting. You see the kind of intricate work on a Jamawar shawl, and you see we had a geographical indication case for a pashmina, for the protection of the word pashmina. And we found that the artist who came had taken 30 years to make one shawl. And that was so the cost of that shawl were his eyes, because
wow,
he was the second one of that kind. And so the panel, the geographical indication panel, they kind of asked, they said, what's the cost of this? And that's the answer was priceless. You can't put a cost on a thing like that. So that's the kind of contribution that India is making And that kind of diversity in art is not available to such an extent in even the most advanced countries in the world. So we may be in numbers lesser producers of creative works or inventors, but in terms of the diversity, much, much more.
That's an incredible kind of fact that, about the Pashmina maker that spent 30 years developing a piece of work. I mean, that's, especially in today's era, that's, very unheard of kind of fact for us to kind of digest, that you could spend so long developing one product and being so passionate about it.
That's right.
And then you also are a creator. So, we know that you've created, some people may not know, but you've created a board game, Anaryst. Then there's a play called Brainchild that you produced. There's an IP comic book, Adventures of Mr. IP. You've got a compilation of legendary IP matters in the form of a coffee table book called Iponomics. And we know that the firm has been sponsoring the Raj Anand Moot Court competition for 18 years. So there's a lot of contribution that, that you personally and that the firm has put towards creating awareness regarding the importance of intellectual property. So just tell us more about why you feel this needs to be done in a country like India, and why you dedicate so much time to this.
I think just about 2 days ago, I came across this expression, which really reflects a lot of the Indian thinking on universal responsibility. When you say Sarve Bhavant Sukhma, or when you say universal responsibility in Buddhism, Tikkun Olam. Tikkun Olam means think beyond yourself. Think for the whole community. Think for all the others. And I think that's basically, one of the messages which His Holiness the Dalai Lama has been giving, and which I firmly believe in. I think it's very important for everyone to pay back to society. And I think, in a sense, it comes back to you fivefold. So when, for example, I've been involved in trying to spread the message, but as a result of that, the number of people who've got into intellectual property, it has opened up the field. More and more cases have been filed. India got recognized globally as, I wouldn't call it yet an IP superpower, but it's close to being there. Because when they think of one of the top 5 to 10 countries in intellectual property, India comes up there. And in certain areas, you can easily say that Indian law is stronger than even the US and the UK laws. For example, trademarks, concepts of transborder reputation. We protect well-known trademarks perhaps in a stronger way than most countries in the world. And our law books are full of illustrations of that principle. So I would say, paying back, you get back. And the idea is not to keep it to yourself. That was what was driving me all this while.
And is that something that's been there since you were young? Since you've seen your grandfather's influence and your father's after that? It's always about.
Yeah, it's a very strange thing, but psychologically, I grew up feeling guilty about having it all. There was, being the only child, all energies were concentrated on me. All the light was thrown on me. And I felt you'd be surprised, my closest friend was a chap called Richard Lim, very poor family. And I had friends like that. And so I'd look at them and I'd feel guilty about, being born in a reasonable, well-to-do family. And so I think it all started with feeling that I've got to do a lot more to pay back for what I've got. Us
That's an incredible message in any way. But I think even in today's environment where obviously we're going through lockdown and there's a lot of us that are privileged, and even in lockdown, we can have a comfortable lifestyle, but there are hundreds of millions across the country that really need the support of people at the moment. So I think on a general level, then, that's a great message to just pass to those, watching the show as well.
Thank you.
And if it's, and then how do you, because you say, it's also for you, for the fact that you're saying India is, one of the top 10 potentially, IP powerhouses at the moment. Is that a recent phenomena? Because I know when we've talked in the past, and if you go back 20, 30 years, it wasn't, India's not really been recognized as a IP kind of, powerhouse, or, that kind of label you've put to it. So when has that kind of tipping point come that India's taken IP more seriously and, can be recognized as a global contributor in this, with regards to IP law?
I think it's been gradual, but there were some landmark events that happened, like the Code of Civil Procedure in 2002 underwent a change, and that dramatically altered the way courts would function. And then you had the Commercial Courts Act, which came in, and all sorts of judge reform. It was amazing how our judges did a magnificent job of taking control and coming up with reform to build in, at least as far as IP enforcement was concerned, we are shooting up like that. And then at the same time, we also joined international treaties and the TRIPS agreement and all that, and the Paris Convention. And so the turn of the century, we started to change things. The cases that went to court, the first damages, big IP damages case came in 2005. So you had the number of cases from 1972 to 2000 to 1995, when the TRIPS agreement was enacted, 23 years. The number of, although 50 times, the number of patent filings in India remained static between 3,500 and 4,000. So it was like a dead man's curve, a straight line. And then suddenly it jumped after we joined national treaties, and it started to go up, and today it's about 45,000 or plus 45 to 50,000 applications every year. That doesn't compare well with what China files, which is like 1.2 million. But wow, it was relative to ourselves, tremendous jump. And so it was happening all around 1995 onwards. And then it started to gather momentum. And when the Commercial Courts Act came, it's amazing how the judges reacted. They kind of started to make their own changes in the law, procedurally, started to come up with all sorts of creative and innovative dispute resolution systems, and rationalize the system. And today we can finish an entire lawsuit within 1 to 2 years. And so when people think of filing an action, an innovator in America wants to sue somebody, let's say in China, they're thinking of filing in the US, in Germany, and in India. So India comes in the top 5 countries where they want to sue, which is great, which is a great recognition of the strength of our system.
I think that's incredible, because India is not normally recognized for the strength of its kind of legal capacity or legal enforcement. So globally, it doesn't, when you talk about, filing in India or enforcement, India doesn't normally rank that highly. But, kind of stories you're scripting about, actually, with regards to this, in particular, intellectual property, we really are seen as a kind of serious contributor to enforcement. I think that's a very powerful message.
I think what is missing is the kind of achievements that we are making at the legal, on the legal front. They are not being communicated to, let's say, the USTR. And so the US Trade Representative comes up with India on the super and special 301s, and that gets international publicity in every jurisdiction and has great credibility. So people look at that as an indicator. So we probably need that stitch where we need to put this information and make sure that it reaches the right people, so that the reports show us as, of course, we've been changing. Our people, our diplomats are doing a good job of trying to change, and our rankings in global innovation and others have been increasing, and we've been doing much better. But it could be that we are in the top 10. It could get there. We have that potential, and I think it's got to be a combination of what we are already achieving and how that's being communicated globally.
Great. So that moves on to nicely to a question I was going to ask you. That you've primarily you've represented a lot of global brands and inventors when it comes to IP matters, especially with regards to the India issues. The question I was going to ask is, do you feel that there will come a time when you could be representing some of the best that India has to offer overseas? And what needs to happen in India for that trend to accelerate?
No, I think that's a misnomer. That's wrong, because we have a healthy mix of Indian and foreign clients. And I think that's not only is a fact, but it's also necessary. Because if you don't have Indian clients, you can't offer reciprocity to foreign law firms and foreign clients who are, in turn, foreign law firms particularly, looking for reciprocal business. And if you don't have Indian clients, you can't do that. So we do have a 40-60 kind of a ratio.
Okay.
Already. And so all the individual creative talent in this country, the great designers and the fashion designers and the great music composers and lyric writers and their collecting societies and the individual inventors and the big Indian corporate companies, the SMEs and startups, they're all, I've been representing all of them depending on what kind of issues are involved and what is their need.
What do you think though needs to accelerate in India for us to, like we all know the kind of global brands that they're available globally, they're available in India, but for India to be seen as a powerhouse of invention and creativity, and then to have those matters represented around the world, what do you think needs to happen to the community here?
I think one of the most important things is that in India, we have not given the kind of message we did when we came up with, and I think that was certainly something very positive when we came up with an innovation policy, a national innovation policy. That was a great achievement. But we need, and I think CPAM and the DPIIT have been doing a great job of spreading the message. And I think that process can be accelerated further. But it's easy to say, I know how difficult it is for the government also to reach out in such a vast country. What I think is really missing is the correct ambassadors who convey to the world how strong things really are, or how much of innovation is actually taking place in this country. That's one thing which is missing. The other thing which is missing is the number of patent applications that this country files for its size and for the creative talent that it has. And I think in other countries like China, of course, they've done it in a different way, where they obliged companies to file a certain number of patents. Here, in countries like Philippines, the head of the state went and gave a message that patents are very important for our country. So a couple of sentences here and there in our top leaders' messages about the importance of not only innovating, but of legally protecting those innovations, which give us the wealth, without which we don't have the wealth. We are not able to commercialize our innovations. So in order to get that wealth element in, you need to apply for a patent. In countries like the US, they have a Bayh-Dole Act, where if there's public funded money used to invent, you have to show that something came out of it, deliverable. And if there is a patentable subject matter and nobody is applying for it, then the source which funded the money gets the right to apply for it. So you have acts like that. So we need those little pieces to make sure that whatever is being innovated is actually translated into patent filing.
Okay, and you mentioned like China's doing like 1.2 million patent filings a year, and
Yes.
India was around 45,000, 95 onwards. What is it currently at the moment? India per annum?
The number of patent applications are about that much, about 45 to 50,000.
Oh, it's still about the same kind of number. Okay.
That's right.
It
goes up by about 7% every year.
Okay, and you think once we start, once we kind of lobby at government level or educate them to educate the rest of us about patent applications, we could see that number kind of shoot up?
Yes, I think the number of startups, if I remember correctly, is about 62 million. If there are 62 million startups, one patent application per startup, if they could just try. And I tell you from my personal experience, I used to go on morning walks with a gentleman to the Humayun's tomb who had a very extensive pen business, writing implements business. And I just told him that he must apply for patents and trademarks. And he didn't know the distinction between patents and trademarks. But after that discussion, we had 1 or 2 meetings, and he applied. He just went and told his people, you have to apply. I don't care how. The CEO giving that message meant first year, 3 patents were applied. The next year, 25. They learned how to read patents, how to distinguish them, how to read claims, how to draft them, how to apply overseas. Once they got into that rut, they started filing huge number of patent applications. And a foreign company wanted to take over their business for a huge sum of money. I'm just saying that these things have happened. You need to energize the top management, particularly the CEO.
Yeah, I mean, that was a very valuable walk to Humayun's tomb then for your client. We're talking about innovation, right? And obviously in your law firm, Pravin Anand is very well known for innovation. You're known to have hugely modernized the firm, how it functioned. You've brought technology into day-to-day operations from quite a long time ago. You've also, not only have you invested in technology and AI, obviously I know Rajiv very well. You've got a CEO who you brought in from the technology industry to come be your CEO. And in recent years, you've gone on to win, the FT Innovative Lawyer Award twice. So how do you think, one, technology's had an impact on the way you've run the firm, and how have you kind of molded the firm to be recognized as a global innovator within the law firm fraternity?
I think since we act for technology companies, we need to have the absolute cutting technology in our firm, which means even, for example, when we make court appearances, we need to have the best virtual hearing equipment these days and all the networking that goes with it, all the software and hardware and firewalls and other security systems. That's one aspect. The other is we realized as a firm that if we are into patents, we must get the engineers and the lawyers to work together. So many, many years ago, when I went and I spoke at the IIT Delhi on why engineers need to get into IP law, people laughed. They actually thought, but that was the beginning of a study done, and we took in people, and it took about 8 years for us to train the engineers and the lawyers to get along with each other. And we started recruiting them. Now we have a lot of engineers and lawyers who work together. The engineers start to do law, and they They work in beautiful synergy, and that gives us a lot of strength.
And if it only took you 8 years to get engineers and lawyers to work seamlessly together, I think you should also get into marriage counseling, those kind of areas, because that's a great way of being able to get two different mindsets together.
Yeah, I think that culturally, the engineers and the lawyers, they were completely different. The engineers wanted to do everything on the laptop, and the lawyers were very notebook and book oriented, and the engineers would want to come in early and go early, and the lawyers would want to work till very late in the night. So small things like that, and of course the bigger issues as well.
And that leads on to, obviously, well, we'll get on to the next point. But then, with regards to technology, you said, obviously you've worked with technology firms, you understand the kind of value it brings to the business. Any kind of trends that you can see with regards to the kind of integration of technology and law? What future trends could we kind of potentially anticipate coming in the next few years?
You'll have a lot more people coming out of the IITs, having done the institutes that do like Kurukshetra, not Kurukshetra, Kharagpur, which create hybrid, which means people who've got multiple law and science talent. I think we'll see more and more of that genre coming into law, because today technology is not only in the field of patent law, but even in copyright law. You have those complex website cases of intermediary liability and all that. They involve a lot of complex technology. Will you give me a second? My battery is suddenly dying out. I'll just get that charger.
Sure.
Bhaiya, jaldi charger. यहाँ लगा दो. जल्दी. Sorry about that.
That's all right. That's technology impacting the law right now.
Yeah, but quick solution.
We've also talked about how you've managed to integrate a lot of hybrids into the law firm, and I think you're very well known as being kind of one, I think, the rarer cases, especially in India, where you have these hybrid lawyers and a lot of kind of non-lawyers coming into the business and really being a core part of what you deliver.
So, for example, go ahead.
So I was just saying, what kind of leadership style do you need to have to do that? Because that's not easy to be open to having non-lawyers retrain or kind of contribute to the way the firm's being run. So one is bringing them in, and two, how do you make sure that keeps evolving in a kind of in a way that supports the growth of the business and doesn't lead to a lot of kind of infighting everywhere?
I think you have to learn how to manage egos, because there can be a lot of clashes of egos, and you have to learn to give due credit to everyone, because everybody has a set of skills. They may not be the same that the other has, but they may be different. And to learn to appreciate how the skill sets can be used in combination without clashes. I think that's the primary role of a leader. Apart from, of course, wanting to learn himself all the time, because I do believe that I'm a student every day of my life. And you won't believe this, but I sometimes feel I know so little about IP. I actually believe that in my heart. I mean, when I read cases, I sometimes feel depressed that I haven't read this and I haven't read that and I haven't read that, and I've got to cover this and this. And I think it's important to want to have that curiosity to learn, and that hunger to learn more and more. And that, in a sense, gets you closer to the engineers, that gets you closer to the junior lawyers, and you are able to get them to work together because they kind of like it also, and they're able to get along if you're in admiration of what they're doing. I think
that's a great message. Yeah, I mean, managing ego is obviously very important for the more senior you get, and especially as the one they all look up to. So I think that's a great kind of message or trait to communicate to others that are kind of accelerating up their own path. And also, like you said, just recognizing the talent at the bottom, you know, and really kind of involving them in that whole process of how you grow the firm and how you work together.
Yes.
So we're going to go, well, we have a question. I'm going to ask this question we have from the audience, Debanshi. She says, what's your success mantra and what motivates you?
Success mantra. I think my ability to lose bias. One, whenever a bias develops, I can see it developing. I'm able to neutralize it in my own mind. One. Two, focus. I've always had this tremendous focus on IP. I remember when I was in class 5, Principal Father Kunankal came to our class and asked us in St. Xavier's School what we wanted to be. And people said, I want to be Superman. Somebody said, I want to be a firefighter. Somebody said, I want to go to the moon. And I said, I want to be a patent lawyer. And
but how old were you? This is when you were, which grade?
I think 11 or so. And because it was in the family. You would hear words like patent every day. So when I said that, everybody laughed. Maybe it was patent leather or something. I forget what it was. But everybody laughed and made a lot of joke of that. But now take me 25 years later. 25 years later, I call up a friend, Ravinder Oswal, in the US, having gone to San Francisco for a day or two. I called him up. He hadn't heard my voice in 25 years, but immediately recognized. I just said, hello. And he said, hi, Pravin. And I said, how did you know? You didn't have my number, nothing? He says, oh, you were the guy who said in class 5 to the principal that you wanted to be a patent lawyer, and you did that. So he saw it as something that impacted him tremendously. And he saw it as a quality. That's when I realized that focus was a strength. I think it's important to know what you want to do.
Yeah, and have that laser sharp focus on following, you know, your kind of passion or the kind of end goal that you need to get to.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Moving back to the more creative side. So you've met with many innovators, creators, artists. So tell us a little bit more about a few of them or their products and works which have left you with a distinct memory of either their product or their unique, or their mind being so intriguing.
So they've been, I mean, from one end to another. Some have been very creative people. The chap who started Gene Junction in India, Bomi Kamath, and unfortunately he's no more. But Bomi Kamath one day came to me and said that he's come up with an air-conditioned suit. So I said, what is that? So he said, you wear your suit and everything and it's air-conditioned. So I asked him, I said, so you're going to put holes inside the garments? He says, yeah. I said, how are you going to do that with, let's say, Arrow shirts? He says, yeah, we'll have to enter into contracts with them. I said, all right. What about the differential temperature? Here, it'll be air-conditioned. And on top, the heat of Delhi, 45 degrees, you'll have people falling ill. He says, yeah, I've got to talk to doctors about that. So the focus of the guy was just his air-conditioned suit, nothing more. So I had another guy who came and said, you know, I've come up with this butane kind of a fuel, a substitute, which I said, what's so great about it? He says, it doesn't explode. So he said, can I give you a demonstration? I said, all right. So we went down to my mom's kitchen and he started to fix the cooking range with that. And my mom came out and she saw that and she said, what's he going to do? And before you knew it, he opened the gas and it started to leak in the room and you could smell it. And then he started to light a matchstick. And my mom and others, everybody said, what are you doing? There'll be an explosion. He said, no. And nothing happened. And so we said, wow, this is going to be in the newspapers. This is great breakthrough news. Till I realized 10 days later that the calorific value of one butane bottle was not good enough to heat a glass of water. You needed 10 bottles to cook a meal. And we had a Maharaja who once came with a perpetual motion machine. So he said, this will keep the vehicle going. I said, but that's against the third law of thermodynamics. He says, no. And he pulled out a German text where it had said in German, and I couldn't understand, but he translated it as meaning that that was possible. I said, what about a prototype? A couple of days later, he came back with a prototype and he took it down to his ambassador car. Of course, it didn't work, but that was a Maharaja and his invention. Having said all this, you also had a chap from Chandigarh who came, Intel gas guards, Mr. Gupta. He came up with a device where the gas, you could know whether it's half an hour left or 1 hour left or 2 days left on a meter. And what had he done? He'd taken the rack and pinion arrangement of a watch and put it inside a meter. And that was fantastic. So when I saw there was promise there, I said, listen, it was very early years of patent law in India. And so I said, let's go to, you go to England, I'll give you the contact name and you get it drafted there. Because I don't believe that we'll be able to do a world-class job here. He said, all right. He said, you come with me. Anyways, after a lot of persuasion, I went with him. And A. Thornton and Company in UK, they applied for a patent. After that, he flew to Denmark and he got the world's largest producer to place an order for some 2 million pieces of that product.
Wow.
So, and just on the force of that UK application. So you have success stories as well. You have disaster stories and you have success stories.
Yeah,
I think what's important is that these success stories must be told. They must be told. And there are many of them. And that's how people will feel encouraged to innovate themselves. Because sometimes what happens, a person looks at it and he says, oh, this company